She was my greatest love, Quinley. She had the skin of an African-American race, and she was easily the most beautiful of the beautiful women I had called wife. Her arms were bound by scarves at the wrist to the headboard, her legs by ribbons at the ankle to the footboard posts. The restraints held her limbs straight. The restraints were a metaphor for the loving bonds of marriage, that spiritual and social institution which we intimately symbolically took upon ourselves. Our love was too great. Too much almost to announce. Some loves are so much more than the human experience can comprehend that they must be private. A secret of those so bound, our vow was true, if unwitnessed, but binding nonetheless. Her arms stretched in welcome. Embrace. Her body proclaimed, I am yours. Take me, I love it. I love what you do to me, I love you. She was whispering to me, I love you. She said it barely audible. My right hand was on her throat, and I could feel her breath passing. Her eyes were wide open, round, looking at me. Love shining, wanton love shining. I could fall into those dark eyes. I could see myself in them. I was in her. I was one with her. She felt me as far up in her as a man could be, with pleasure and desire and fullness, and she opened her mouth and groaned silently. Quietly, she threw her head right and left. His ecstasy overwhelmed her. She pulled against the restraints, and I groaned too. Finishing, she relaxed then to rest for another time that would never come, and I rested also. The night passed. It was May 17th month, and my 8th wife. It was primal. This love I had developed with just a few women before Quinley had been Lana in January, the first month, and first wife in Independence. Lana was blonde, a tall and heavier woman, a South African farm girl who welcomed my company, and love developed from that. She had taken me with an energy that drained me that night, and I had been happy to satisfy her on her hands and knees. I had left her sleeping also, and our marriage had of course found success. In February, it was Binley, a lovely and tiny Oriental woman who caressed me as no other of my wives. That was the Branson job. She had taken me in her mouth and swallowed of my essence, and her sleep that night followed time after time of justification. She had cried out for more in her language, and we had reached heights Blay, the name of the second prime in the alphabet, a sweet, sweet memory. March was a windy month, and Carol blew into my life in Minnesota. She was a librarian and wore the glasses of a woman trying to hide great beauty behind shyness. I found it she and I were wed, and her kisses tasted of strawberries. Her hair was light brown. Her skin had a reddish tint and freckles that excited me. I remember sitting next to her in a theater in the dark in a corner, unnoticed, tasting those red berry lips and hiding my caresses from the audience. We escaped our daily concerns, and our marriage consummated quickly. I was meant to be with Carol, and she with me. Marriage is everlasting in its love in heaven, even when ended on earth by death, the third month and third of the alphabet. Carol is a special memory, a model of the good woman become, the good wife in May 5th month, and letter were fulfilled in St. Louis, almost home. And with each wife, love deepened, matured, satisfied. Ellie was a pixie with active, playful eyes and a playful attitude. Ellie and I explored the world of love toys, and she settled upon a machine that brought her to rapture as I joined with her, and it was good. She cried out at her pinnacle and slept with her head on my chest thin. I woke her once in the night when I thought she was yet asleep, so I helped her with loving embrace and caresses to her face and neck. Ellie. Endurance and sexuality will be her legacy with me. I love that woman, and she loved me. So these primal numbers marched into and out of my life as there was Jennifer, actually Gwai Ophir, in July. Jennifer, who demanded we consume it so quickly, who suggested a new technique which we sadly never fulfilled, as she fell to slumber before then in such joyous union were we bound only by hands. She kissed me and begged for more and more until exhaustion claimed her. Jennifer I will always associate with July and all warm nights and free rambunctious sex. She was a woman of many virtues. As I journeyed through the primal months and letters of the alphabet, I found myself capable of greater and greater love for women and a particular woman. Love grows over time. It is not cheap or toddy. The bedroom is its own place, a place for that deepening and spiritual love to meet the animal love of the sex act, the body meeting the urges it so often must suppress. So it was with Karen in November, Kansas City. Kansas. Karen was older than I, 15 years or so, but a lovely, lovely woman with hair just beginning to gray. I remember our first kiss, our only kiss, come to think, in the way her tongue fought with mine as I held her wrists behind her, and she pushed her hips into my erection. Karen wanted sex like no other woman I have ever known, and we spent our marriage in exploration of one another, finding this spot and that touch and the other act. Karen was forceful and strong, and our mating was correspondingly powerful. Karen was almost too much woman for me, if there is such a thing. Incredible woman. The 13th letter and month were just 2 months later. I was barely recovered as I thought of the spirited love of Karen and November. But Mindy was the January wife I had always dreamed I would find, dark-haired, medium beau gothic, with pure pie sings and tattoos. Never had I been attracted to such a woman, and to find marriage with one, it was a whirlwind romance. I saw her one day, and we were married within a few hours, but never to regret. There were rings to pull and staves to twiddle and art to trace. I entered this woman with a delicate touch which surprised her, and she insisted on the ball gag so that her ecstasy was not so vocal. We used chains for her hands and feet and up around her neck then, and it was a completely new experience for me. Our time together was brief, but she was in blessed sleep that proved her satiated, physically, emotionally, spiritually. I loved her. Stamp property of intern name here. Mindy for M, the 13th letter. I rested through the non-primes and then found Quinley. Quinley was special, even among all these specials, tall and thin, smiling, encouraging. She then turned into a raging hurricane in bed with an honesty and purity that other women lack. I have loved all 8 wives, but Quinley was like a goddess among the others. Her love for me was obvious and genuine, and her desire in bed insatiable. Quinley the best. 2 months to 19 letter S July. Oh, I remember love and marriage, 8 wives, and no hint of bigamy. Morals are essential to family and other institutions. You see, I'm a monogamist. Mother insists. No, I tell you, it is a pattern. Josh Mitchell was saying into the phone. His pistol and holster were in the drawer. It's based in prime numbers. He attacks in the 1, 2, 3D, 5th, 7th, 11th. 13th and 17th month, he numbers the alphabet and does the same for the women's names. He strangles them, usually, although the one Karen, the oldest one, he broke her neck. Yeah, well, if the pattern holds, it'll be a woman whose name starts with AS, and it'll happen in July. July is the 19th month since he started a year and a half ago. S is the 19th letter. No, I didn't figure it out. It was my wife, Linda. She's always doing Sudoku. And I mentioned the case. I mean, it's in all the papers. We have the DNA we have. Emo, we have no idea who it is. No one in the database, no prints to match them to the guy just started killing women and hasn't let up. Oh, one bit of good news. The prime numbers become farther between as we get higher. Okay, I'll get back. He hung up. Mitchell hated sex offenders, he hated murderers, he hated thieves, he hated prostitutes, he hated drug dealers. Most cops came to see the world in black and white. You stole, or you did not. You murdered, or you did not. You dealt, or you did not. The world was black and white because it was a long-learned conviction. But he was sure, except for his wife, Linda. Now she was a special woman. Probably the only woman on this side of the Mississippi who could have married him, since he could see the miss from his bedroom window. There were a number of women around who might have loved him had he had an interest in girls from Illinois, but he didn't. When you're married to Linda Mitchell, you don't need another woman. Linda was more than enough for him, or the 6th Fleet had they been near and she been interested, which she definitely was not. Linda had it good with him. He took care of her, and she took care of Josh, but he did not trust her women. Like Linda got hit on, flirted with, noticed, but she was his. And his only. He was sure Linda Mitchell at that moment was in a motel just across that same Mississippi, actually within sight of her bedroom window, had anyone had binoculars to check out houses across the river. Her legs were spread as wide as she could spread them, while her faux love Paul Pino pounded his stiffly impressive member into her as hard as he could. Linda was getting drilled, and she liked Pino to do it because he was not a cop. Not stupid, not married, and not interested in her as a human being. She wanted to have sex, and that cop she was married to was making the world safe by fighting crime. So she called Paul and said, "You want to do it?" And of course he did so. They were doing it. It happened about once a month. Pino didn't even have her number, but he had her. So she called when she wanted some. It averaged out one this month, none that to the next. She felt a little guilt, but really she just thought she ought to feel guilt. So that might be what guilt felt like. You know, this was the 7th time by her. Reckoning she'd probably stow calling him once her husband got promoted, but so far it hadn't happened, and he'd been saying it would be soon for 5 years now. He just wasn't all that smart, she figured. "Oh, Paul, do it. I love it." she said almost monotone, and he heard only, "You are the best ever," but he aimed to please, and those two widely spread legs of hers were long and smooth, and the likes of which rarely comes a man's way, of course. That piece was rapidly losing its mystery as word slowly got around that it was available if only you had whatever Paul Pino had, and that had included luck. Linda was a fine-looking lady, as a matter of fact, in this factory town now, 1.5 factory town due to closures. Linda was as beautiful got, maybe world-class, with a little makeup to hide that sunspot on her cheek, that same sunspot Josh thought was endearing, and wished she would not cover up. A few of the guys at the DA's office knew Pino was doing her, and even knew she was a police detective's wife. But instead of giving him up or telling the idiot they just wished it were them instead of him, well, except for Joseph Martin, who didn't give anyone up for tawdry affairs on principled grounds like anyone really believed in those anymore. He would only give someone up if it affected the job which he still considered a profession. This day he was filling in for one Paul Perino, who was unavoidably detained, snatching that desirable love from Linda Martin, was going before a judge for some crack case he knew nothing about until a half hour ago now it affected the job. Finally, Paul pounded Linda into tedium and himself into a climax, and what counted for lovemaking to some people ended in room 105 at the Elegant Rooms Motel, ended with Paul in a sweat and Linda thinking, "I've become dang now, his juice is going to seep out of me for an hour. His perspiration is all over me. I'm moist of him. Yuck." She knew she should like this more. Something was wrong, she felt it, but she physically shook her head to clear it, and yet it lingered. Her husband was the issue. Josh was adult, but he took care of her. Yet illicit sex felt good at the time, just like vodka feels good at the time, and she just hid the dank with a lot of Kleenexes in her panties. It had felt good at the time. She was trying to convince herself that it was worth it. It was fun. There was nothing wrong. She was not cheap, not bad, and it was no problem with Josh. She dressed as Pino rolled out of bed and found his underwear. Paul got a call in to see his boss, an important guy, not the inflated importance Pino feigned to Linda Mitchell, but a guy who made the decisions, who said yes we will or no we won't, instead of just suggesting courses of action like Pino did when he wasn't screwing around. Pino did not realize his boss had figured out where he was, who she was, and what they were doing. He dressed happy he'd substituted Linda Mitchell for some crack CT appearance, and hurried to see his boss, as Pino pulled up his zipper at the police station. Josh Mitchell got a call to come see the captain, who was about 5 feet away in another room. Josh was there before the captain put down the phone. "Josh, I just got a call from the DE about your wife." "Yeah, she's a special woman, prettiest gal in 2 counties. Josh smiled proudly. "She's a junior." Josh felt like he'd been hit by a truck. The captain did not mince words, did not make things up, and did not play games with his men. Mitchell just stared at him for some seconds and then felt his legs go wobbly. He sat down. "Sorry, sir. I had to sit, no problem. Who is he?" Das says some junior named Paul Perino. He thinks they get together about once or twice a month. Pino's on the way out, partly because of this and partly because he's become somewhat arrogant and open about the affair, and no one can stand him over there. Das says the guy's avoiding work, disappears a lot. Might have another lay, too. Mitchell wondered what he should do. "You can't hurt her," the captain said, anticipating Josh's thoughts. "You're not the first detective to face this problem. I'm on wife 3 crosses between wives because he had an affair. Also, some guys actually work it out and save the marriage, just don't lose it. Can I go home? Want someone to go with you? Nah, I've been kicked in the gut before, just not by her. I didn't see it coming. I feel angry and foolish." The captain nodded, staring at Josh with an excess that was meant as support, but could have been, "Oh, you poor sap." The captain just didn't have many expressions. Mitchell drove home taking a wrong turn, and still beat. His wife there, she had to go around the long way to find a bridge across the Miss, and actually passed in front of Josh's office then, and for him it was a straight shot into his neighborhood, but he turned for some unknown reason, and it took him a minute to go around the block. He made some coffee and sat at the kitchen table. Linda breezed, and 15 minutes later, "Oh, you're home, honey. I didn't expect you," she said. Seeing him there, she came right over to kiss him, and to get by, she wanted to get upstairs and into the shower. She had an uncomfortable number of Kleenexes between her legs. "Sit down, Linda." It was all he said. It was not his loving husband voice, more his crowd control firm voice. Although not loud, she was brought up then, startled. She knew something was wrong. He could not know, could he? She thought no, after all, he was doltish. He was a luck. Please sit. Is something wrong, Josh? She was scared now, and she took the seat beside him on the end of the table. Pino is going to be fired, partly because he's been screwing you. She inhaled sharply. She wanted to deny it. Demand he rely on his trust of her. Ask, how could you believe that instead she played dumb because that was what you do when you don't know how you've been caught? What are you talking about? She said it, and then wished she hadn't. She knew Josh would not make an allegation. He would state facts already proven. She put her face in her hands. How long has it gone on? He queried. Apparently, the jig was up. She did not lie 5-6 months, once or twice a month, just when you were working a lot, or not home. He was just a guy, a hobby. Someone to get me off. It was not love, not really an affair, just sex with a good-look guy and no commitment. Josh was squeezing his hands into fists, looking carefully at them, studying the bones and sinew and skin. She looked at him, but he would not meet her gaze. I didn't mean to hurt you. She said it, the 1 billionth woman in the history of mankind to say it. For that reason, she never knew she could have won free groceries for life or something. If she'd been the billion of something else, of course not. Don't let it bother you, he said with disdain, and she heard it and knew her diance was not a diance. Why had she rationalized? She wondered if these mistakes were recoverable, if the marriage could be saved. How many others were there? We've been married, what, 7? No, 8 years, no others, Josh. I don't know why I did it. Was he better at it? Better built, bigger? No, nothing like that. Worse, if anything, but even bad sex is good. He just looked at her and she realized her last words had not helped. She did not speak. Discretion is a part of valor. It's also part of intelligence and many other virtues. He looked out the little kitchen window at the blue sky, a wistful expression on his face. He thought out loud, I am so embarrassed, so angry, so much in pain. I never knew it felt like this. I've dealt with cucked husbands dozens of times and told them to be calm and had no idea the terrible hurt they were suffering inside. I saw it, but I didn't get it. It's withering. He talked as if his personal experience would help him in his job. He'd be a better cop now that he discovered his wife screwed around on him. He should thank her, he thought ironically. It's palpable. I can touch the pain. It feels like a surgeon could remove its silence. He looked at her. Do you want me to leave? She asked. Or do you want to? She tried to imagine pain for adultery, for betrayal. Nope. Nothing there. Josh wouldn't screw anyone but her, she knew. And if he did, she'd think about it. Then he asked, did you ever do it here, not here? Who knows about it? He asked no one unless they saw. Us going into the motel. Probably people he works with missing him in the day, covering. Josh rubbed the knuckles of his right hand, but Linda knew he would not hit her. The wall. The table, the refrigerator were more likely targets. You can stay. I don't know what to do. The captain got a call from the DA, told him about you and Pino and sent me home to deal with it with you, but I don't know what I want. Linda got up and made a cup of coffee in the Keurig. She sat back down. Are we going to make it, Josh? She asked. I don't see how. He said maybe no. I don't know. Did she want to make it? Would her nature lead her down the path she'd started? Now he wanted to strangle her. Now maybe he could get her to that psych if he could just keep from throttling her. It gave him an idea. Manipulation was more her suit than his, but it was a way. Han, I am going to the car, stay here. He went to the garage, found the file on the sex offender, and brought it to the table. Josh inhaled. The captain appreciated your prime theory about the sex offender. Why was he bringing that up? Was he trying to keep a semblance of control by bringing up work? Linda said nothing but wondered, this is the file on the sex offender. Look at the location of the murders, all the paperwork, see if you can figure where he will be next month when his next attack is due. Just look at it. Ow. You want me to study a case now? She asked. She was mystified. She'd done it before, studied a case once. It led to an apprehension. More often it did not. Yeah, just that, and no more. Had her affair not mattered now that he thought about it. She could not understand. She was sure he loved her. Positively loved her. She saw the emotion and wondered that she cared for his pain rather than feeling any of her own. Are you okay, Josh? He shook his head. I want to shoot you. I want to strangle you. I want to screw you, but I know you probably have him in you. I can't deal with you now. So you look at the file and I'll get myself under control. I don't know if I can focus on paperwork. Josh just looked at her as if he was going to commit one of the first 2 acts he'd listed. Okay, I'll look. She agreed. She opened the file and started distributing pages around the table. Josh sat for a few minutes, considering her and the situation. He made another coffee, noticed his hand shaking, and watched his fingers open. He dropped the cup, which shattered on the floor. Linda jumped a foot in her seat. "Sorry, I'll clean it up. You keep looking." He used paper towels and a mop, but when he finished, the floor felt sticky. He made another cup and sat down, watching her work. Linda pushed sex and Pino and Josh in marriage and all of it aside and looked harder at the file, just another Sudoku problem. She thought it was where the murders happened that stuck in her mind. She stared at the locations. There was something there. It was there, something like when you see some moves ahead in chess and know you will win. She looked at the DNA reports, the dates, the color of the P's hair, dark brown, 10 shoe size, probably a 16 neck tag found beside one of the victims. Nothing. Back to the map, Independence, Twain, East St. Louis, nowhere, Minnesota. She was about to dismiss that last, but it stuck. No, what is that town really? Wyckoff, nowhere, a man? A crossroads, probably. Why did he kill a girl from Wyckoff? How did he meet her? There is nothing there, but Linda knew the name. Why did she know the name? She closed her eyes and concentrated on what she knew of rural Minnesota. It was a full minute when she got a picture of her dad rolling a strike bowling alley. There's a bowling alley in Wyckoff, actually part of a bar and grill. Her father played tournaments 20 years ago. He was a good bowler, but never won a big tournament. He'd driven up to Wyckoff, to a tournament, the last tournament before her mother left them. That's why she knew the name. Oh, why had she screwed Pino? He looked good, and he had no moral thing against screwing, that was sure. But he was a jerk she knew had known, and she had thought that an advantage. She knew her mind was wandering the case. Look at the case. No, put them in the order of occurrence. All of them. Independent South African white girl, Twain. Asian girl, Wyckoff librarian, St. Louis, sex toys. East St. Louis, Guay, Kansas City, Kansas, mature woman, Twain, Gothic, Paducah. Kentucky, black girl, Y2, and Twain. There is a bridge here, a factory producing with cabinets paneling, pressboard, a flooring paneling business, 35,000 people, fast food, 2 motels, she thought, and she grimaced, remembering both another small town AC across the river with 1 motel, Paducah. What's in Paducah? Linda sat back and closed her eyes. Usually she could find connections in things. She seemed to be able to remember the minutiae that other people did not. She'd forget the army base outside of town, but remember that they had 24 traffic lights, forget the hospital, and remember the founder history. For some reason, she hooked things into memory better than other people. And worse, her mom had been frustrated by her poor grades in school. She remembered almost everything others let go. But associated strangely, she could finish any problem in arithmetic, but not like she was taught. She didn't add, she put things together and recounted it. Made her slow, but usually right. It was not a way to do well on a test. But the year they identified her problem, she'd gotten 3 of 11 problems correct, but she'd only done 3. She remembered Mom and how Dad cried when he read her note. She wondered if Mom knew how she'd hurt him much, as Linda had just hurt Josh, but Josh was a tough guy, right? Linda had a clenching in her middle since Josh had sat her down, and as she looked at the back of her eyelids, she realized it was either guilt or fear, compassion for Josh, or something. She knew she'd hurt someone who did not deserve it. And she knew he'd never get over it, and in some way it mattered to her. That was strange. There had been a purity to Josh's love for her. He wanted her in every way that every other man wanted her, and the way every woman wanted to be loved, too. Why had she played with that guy? Why didn't she care about the second part? Paducah has a large wood paneling distribution center, a hub for this part of the country. Anyway, Twain had a large producer and some subsidiary industries. Wyckoff had nothing I need. My laptop, she said to Josh. Josh nodded. She was back in a minute, typing Wyckoff in Wikipedia. 444 people live there. It took her another minute, and she pulled out her phone and called the number. Hello? I'm calling about the old bowling alley you have there. I can't find it online. She listened for a bit. When was that? She nodded. She wrote down a date. What happened to the lane some time past. Do you know who bought the wood? She asked. Thanks. Is there any other business? No, sure, thanks. Again, I think I'm getting it, Josh. I think I'm understanding. She saw he was thinking about them. I'm so sorry, really. I've supported you. You've stayed home to write. And you've sold a few stories, but I've supported us, he said without focus, as if his world were crumbling. She realized it was. She'd feel bad about that. Sometimes she was sure I wanted a family, but you kept putting it off to get that novel done now. He shook his head. He really did love her. She thought strange idea that someone could love her. When did she stop loving him? Had she ever loved really? When had she started thinking he was stupid? Why he roused himself so? Tell me what you're thinking about the sex offender. I'm thinking he's involved in the wood business. Twain Paducah there are with distribution centers, paneling factories, and distributors in Twain. It's practically just the factory and the panel business. And the panel business is so much smaller, I think Wyckoff caps it. I think he has something to do with redistributing bowling lanes. Wyckoff only has 400 people in it, and some more in the surrounding area. Their victim was the library girl. She commuted to another town to work anyway the month before the murder. Their bowling alley was demolished. The lanes were sold off first. The lanes are very sought after in some markets for replacement floors, wall panels. Quality stuff, very hardy. I need to look into Independence and KC yet, but I'm betting someone either bought the wood our guy was selling or he found some more wood for sale in another alley. Demolished, something like that. Maybe he checks up on installations. I'm guessing there's something in each place. Just before the murder job finished, he finds the girl, kills her, and moves on. He probably finds them in less secure places, places without cameras. If he sees a security setup, he just goes somewhere else. She looked pensive. Oh, he might use the library to find girls with the right name. Not sure, but that might work. You might want to check here with the factory and panel businesses. They probably know him even if he doesn't work for them or have had contact, so do you have any conjecture as to where he might be going next month? I guess he's doing a job in that town right now, so look for a bowling alley demo or sale or someone installing a specialty floor, and then look at the buyer's SL sellers. I'd bet he just hangs around after for a while. He does not want to be hasty. He knows all the evidence is piled up, but you have no record of him. How's he just hang around? We've checked motels and got nothing. Maybe he has a camper. Lots of camping even near the cities. He'd not be obvious. Hardly any problem registering hack. Some campgrounds are free and don't even have registration, or tent camping in a national forest, free again, and little control or registration, or he could park in a Walmart lot by the trucks down a deserted dirt road anywhere. She looked down. I'm going for a shower. Can we talk more later? She knew those were the things to say. Yes, she did. She watched Hallmark Channel some. I'll bet you are, Josh said, looking right at her. Feeling the pain, knowing she did not feel any, she left the room and went up the stairs. Josh had realized shortly after they were married that she did not feel like other women feel. It had taken him some months to realize. She thought she had manipulated him into marriage. She did not think she needed him. She did not worry about losing him. She did not love him in any regular sense of the word. She's a sociopath of some sort, he'd realized, and it explained the lack of emotion at emotional times. She'd taken the death of her father, as a matter of fact, almost like she was not affected, as if it was of no matter. The man who devoted his whole adult life to raising her, who held her, and was perhaps out of his element in trying to be father and mother to her, but who loved her in that pure and complete way fathers can love daughters. Perhaps that caused it some sort of double bind, probably initiated by her mother's decampment. He remembered her strange emotional distance. Another time she called him once 2 years ago and said she was driving to the hospital. She was having a miscarriage. The child he'd wanted more than anything that they delayed for years lost. He arrived in her room before the operation, and she was sitting in bed reading a magazine. She was upset at the cramping, but nothing else seemed on her mind. Josh had kissed her, but that she was lighthearted. Even asked if he'd like to try a recipe listed on one page sometime they could try for a baby again someday, but she'd get back on the pill when the doctor said this was enough for now. He remembered her another time being fascinated watching a linebacker break his leg on TV. It had made Josh sick to his stomach, but she ran it back and forth a dozen times in slow motion. He wondered why she married him. Did he remind her of Dad? Did it seem an easy way to get support while writing her novel? Could a sociopath produce a novel with understanding of normal emotions? Did honesty mean anything to her? Could she be faithful? Did he want to have children with someone who could not love in the normal sense? Is there principle in her morality? Her personality was focused. It was as if she'd seen how you should act, how you should feel in any situation, and then she acted that way. She was ingenuous. In many ways, it explained her willingness to spend nearly a decade working on a book he'd never seen. Accepting his support as her due, she did not seem concerned about Pino now at all, and her concern for Josh was minimal, as if she were going through the motions, because she knew how she ought to feel. Perhaps she feared losing Josh's support, which might mean she'd have to work. He knew she didn't love the other guy, or any guy he knew it would not go away. He had wanted her to see a psychologist for years, but he did not know how to get her to go now. He would give her an ultimatum, psychologist, psychiatrist, or divorce tomorrow. Perhaps it would not matter. In any case, he saw his marriage as a train wreck, and the first car had just jumped the track. He slept in the spare room, the one he planned on fixing up for a child. Someday, he contacted Twain with Building Products, the major employer in the town since the airplane factory shut its doors. He spoke with several of the marketing and production managers. 3 of them identified the same person when he mentioned bowling lanes. The man was an independent supplier to home builders and rehabbers, buying bowling lanes, hiring people to carefully take one up and deliver it to the buyers. Some people loved that wood for their homes, and he had created a niche for himself. His name was Michael Juvenile, and he was not on any fingerprint database, DNA database, or any other Josh could find, but they had a description nondescript speaking about 510 slightly thin wire rim glasses, dark brown hair parted on his right dark eyes, right-handed, which they knew from the murders wore black gym shoes and casual clothes, often a sport coat without a tie, short-sleeve button-down shirts. In summer, one guy thought he drove a Mustang, another thought he drove a Dodge Charger. He checked the databases, and he had a car license plate in Missouri, a home address south of St. Louis, and a Mustang. He checked the home address and saw it on Google. He next called the county engineers of the counties in which the murders had occurred. Home building, remodeling, and bowling alley demolition all required permits. He found a bowling alley that was being torn down in a week, not in one of those counties, but in one across the river from Twain in Illinois. He contacted the sheriff of Pitt County to get his opinion. "Sheriff Jones, I'm Josh Mitchell, a detective over here in Twain. What can I do for you, Josh?" The sheriff of a small county probably did not have a lot of deputies, so Josh was happy to deal with the head guy. "I'm working on the serial sexual assault and murderer. I have a conjecture. Yeah, lead, we haven't had an incident over here, but are you projecting? I have no proof, no solid evidence, but you have a bowling alley coming down in a week or two." "Yeah, you think it's connected?" the sheriff asked. "Yeah, I have a consultant who thinks the guy might be involved in buying and selling used flooring from bowling alleys. I have a name, a guy named Michael Juvenile, who might be buying the flooring over there. I'd like to come over and see if he's around. He's not in any of the usual databases. I can't even find an address nearby. Mike Juvenile, never heard of him. Why don't you come over and we'll run up there? It's out of town at a little crossroads. I don't think they've started on it yet. Permits just went out. I'll be there first thing in the morning." "Hey, Josh, the consultant is your wife." "Huh, busted. It's not that unusual for a wife to give her detective husband advice. Yeah, she's good at getting over roadblocks. Bring her along if you'd like." "Not sure that's a good idea." Josh said, "Up to you." Josh headed home and found Linda at her computer at the kitchen table, writing away. He wondered if she really was trying to write a novel. "Hi, honey," she said. He sat down and said, "Linda, I've decided something. I'm willing to stick with our marriage a little longer, as long as you pay steady visits to a psychologist or psychiatrist, beginning as soon as we can make an appointment." "You mean a marriage counselor, right?" She said, "Not really. I mean a psychologist or psychiatrist. If one specializes in marital issues too, that would be okay. But I want you to see one about you." She was fuming. "You a-hole. You think I had an affair because I'm crazy. No, I think you're a sociopath," which brought her to a sudden stop because she could see the symptoms in herself. She knew she didn't feel like other people, and she was smart. In usual ways, other people would feel sad. Now she would think other people would feel glad. Now she know. Josh went on, "Take it or leave it. I need to know if you can be lived with. I needed your fidelity. I need it again all the time. You are the most beautiful woman around. Men will continue to hit on you. I need to know if you can be trusted ever. If you do not agree to these terms today, I will see a lawyer and file for divorce tomorrow." She did not like the ultimatum, but agreement would at least delay the end of the gravy train, so she assented. I gave her a list of 5 psychiatrists. She looked them up on the internet and chose a woman Josh called immediately and made the appointment for 2 days from then for both of them in the morning. Linda, I'd like you to go with me tomorrow to work. I'm heading across the river to Pike County where a bowling alley is being torn down in a week. Sheriff actually suggested you might come along. Maybe you'll have some insight." She was startled. Josh said, "Except for bringing home some cases for you to get. Give me a new idea. I've kept the job strictly mine. I don't know if the department has a policy against this sort of thing, but since I am checking out your theory and you might gain some insight, I decided to just do it and suffer any consequences. If you'll come, I'll do it. It might be a gas. Josh wondered if she had an ulterior motive. They drove across the Twain Trans-Mississippi Bridge at 7 the next morning at 7:45. They were in Sheriff Jones's office, sipping Starbucks coffee and discussing the case. Sheriff Jones called me Terry. Pleased when he saw Linda felt that Juvenile might show up at the alley, but was more likely to make his deal at the offices of the real estate dealer, a guy named Bob Jones, who just happened to be the sheriff's brother, called Bob last night to find out who the realtor was, and he said it was him he's coming by in a few minutes to discuss possible buyers. He says he has been contacted about selling the wood, but he didn't remember the guy's name. He has his card, though. We don't get over here very much. Linda said, avoiding the fact she'd been in the elegant rooms a day ago. So, tell us, where would a guy go to find a murder victim? Jones considered there are some bars, a dance club that'll let anyone in most nights, restaurants, lots of churches. Josh hadn't thought of churches. Josh said, we believe the next attack will be next month if he follows the pattern we've distinguished, usually about a week after his business is concluded. We also think he is likely to find a girl with a name starting with S first name. We conjecture that he uses the word local to find the victim, decide on the tack, and then either stalk her or set his plan in motion he has killed in their homes. Usually the one was in an abandoned building in a woods. Linda spoke up. I think he likely finds them in bars. All the other victims were known to visit bars in the weeks before their murders. Even Wyckoff, the librarian. She actually lived above a bar, although she rarely went in it. You know, Josh said, which bar is he most likely to visit if he's as unfamiliar with Pike as we are, and his business is at the Reilly office and the bowling alley Julie Saloon is out of town on a lesser road. But it's the most popular among those who live here. Shady Grove is in town. Not fancy, but gets a lot of women on Friday night, probably Shady Grove, yeah? He said into the office walked Bob, the sheriff's brother. Between the two of them, they could ruin a couch in one sitting. These two guys must have weighed 300 each. They had the jovial faces that some overweight people get. Hi, Bob Jones said, the realtor, smiling and holding out his hand to Linda. Bob had the talent of immediate prioritization. His eyes were good. Even the obese have hopes when unexpectedly confronted by a beautiful woman. Linda Mitchell, she said, shaking his hand. Josh Mitchell, Josh said. They shook also. Eventually, once Bob let go of Linda. So you were interested in someone interested in buying the lanes? He said, yeah, just playing a hunch probably means nothing. I said it's usually best to deprecate to avoid getting hopes up or spooking the perk. That's police type. Talk, some guy came by when I was out of the office, said he'd have the lanes removed. He'd purchased them direct from the owners a few days ago. He left his card with a note he'd have the lanes out by Friday. Bob Jones said owner said he made a good deal on the lanes. He didn't know if Juvenile would be around. He said he'd hired a company to get the lanes out. Has anyone touched the card? Josh asked. There was a chance we could lift a print, actually. Yes, my secretary and I have it here. He said he pulled it out of a folder. Sheriff Jones grabbed a small evidence bag and told his brother to drop it in. I didn't think we'd get much off that card, but maybe that's serious. Bob asked. Yeah, the most, Josh replied. So the group ended up out at the bowling alley. Bob had a key and they went in. Everything had been sold that was not part of the building. The floors usually had to wait when money was up in the air. It was a fairly small, dark building that smelled of old cigarettes and beer. Furniture was all gone, sold or trashed. The machines had been sold too. Although who would want such out-of-date equipment? Josh and the sheriff looked around for a while. Linda talked to Bob in that charming way she had. The lanes looked like decent flooring and paneling. They went to Bob's office, then hoping the guy would come by. Linda talked to Josh when Bob had to leave the room. His secretary was out sick, so he had to handle a lot of mundane tasks. Why don't I get dressed appropriately and spend some time at the Shady Grove tonight? Maybe the guy will be trolling. I'll use my middle and maiden name. You can keep an eye on me. Her middle name is Susan Maiden Shaughnessy. Yeah, another beautiful Mick. Josh thought about that. He knew the captain might criticize him for it, but it would be outside his jurisdiction, and she would be in little danger with Josh near it, and he liked it. Maybe the guy would pick her up. The odds were greatly against it, but they did not have a better plan at hand. So at 4, they popped out, stopped in to see the sheriff and let him know the little undercover action at the Grove, and Linda dressed for the night. She wore tight jeans and a tight, sexy top that clung to her. She wore a BR of the other girls had been without when last seen. Josh programmed an emergency button into her cell phone and checked the GPS app just in case. Under no circumstances are you to leave the building with him. Do you get it? Do not leave with him. Do not get in a car. Make a stand right there. As soon as we get his DNA and her prints, we have enough. You leave alone. I'll watch him another minute to be sure he doesn't follow, and then I'll be out. Meet at the car. He is probably just going to be casing the joint, trying to find its name. He may not come over if he finds your name. Do not leave with him, and once he identifies you as Sue, he may not even bother meeting you. He could follow to see where you go or live. Linda was laughing. I understand. I get it. I won't leave with him. Josh spoke to the barkeep about what they were doing. He agreed to help, but nothing happened that night. Linda sat on a stool and fended off suitors. Finally, it was 11:40, and they called it quits. Josh and Linda's first appointment with Dr. Carly Ray turned into a marathon session for Linda. For the first hour Josh was there, she asked why they were seeking counseling. Josh said he had threatened divorce if Linda did not seek help. During the hour, Josh explained the affair, Linda's unusual characteristics, and gave examples. Linda said he thinks I'm a sociopath. After an hour, the doctor asked him to leave and said that she wanted to talk with Linda a bit longer. 2.5 hours later, she called him in. Dr. Ray, Linda has agreed that I may tell you everything that we talked about in this session. I may tell you my conclusions and ideas as to her personality and character and her mental health. I am a psychiatrist. That means I may prescribe medicine to help with her treatment. She looked directly at Josh. Linda was looking down. In my opinion, your wife is not a sociopath. Her condition has a lengthy name, which comes down to this. She has a conscience, but it is subsumed. She knows right from wrong, but she has suffered such great damage to her emotional center that she feels anything good for her is due. Because of past suffering, she is capable of love, but she uses defense mechanisms to control it, like not seeming to feel guilt about the affair. Not caring if her lover is hurt, that sort of thing she does feel. And sooner or later, she will likely feel the depths of the pain she has caused you and him and herself. She may start crying someday for no reason, realizing the lives she has wounded and feeling the pain, and it could go on as if the thing just happened. That is not a bad thing, that is a turning point, but it may occur differently, sly or not at all. The doctor paused. Josh said, she is very smart, doctor. Are you sure she's not playing you? She thinks she's the smartest in the room, no matter who is there. The doctor smiled. Fortunately, I'm used to not being the smartest in the room. No, I don't think she's playing me or you. She actually loves you. But it hurts sometimes. It is subsumed. Then the doctor thought for a moment. Oh, forthrightness is often a characteristic. It was very easy talking with her. She willingly divulges information to someone she trusts. And there is no inhibition speaking with me that I could see anyway. Can she love children? I told you about the miscarriage. Oh yes, she could once we get it to emerge. There are cases where they actually emerged because of the birth of the child. We can treat this condition group, and individual therapy help a lot. There are a number of drugs that can help. This is similar to schizophrenia in some ways, an emotional dichotomy. Some of the same drugs work to give a person a completely normal outlook, but it is chronic, it can diminish, and over time, her real emotion can dominate. But there will be some interesting moments along the way. Was I way off thinking this is caused by a double bind, probably mom leaving and dad being unable to replace or nurturing? No, that was spotting, probably coupled with some things before her mother left, and if she wants to tell you, there is a lot more to that she has kept from everyone. Linda spoke. I do not want to divorce Josh. I knew the affair was wrong. Dr. Carly said you left something out. Linda looked as if she didn't remember. Oh, the denigration's putting you down, thinking less of you. I'm sorry for that too. Dr. Carly said part of this goes hand in hand with any affair. The husband's an idiot, that sort of thing. It's all part of guilt. That's actually a good sign for your wife. It shows she has a conscience. Yeah, I've seen a lot of that in domestic disputes, Josh said. Dr. Carly, you should know, Josh, that the marriage is important to her. She has an inevitability in her outlook. She expected it to fail, and this may have been part of her manipulation to make it so she sees people. She can manipulate you by getting your love, tricking you into marriage and some convoluted reasoning. She has the lover. Others, I married her because I loved her. There was no trick. She knows she's smart and that other people are not ass. Dr. Carly smiled. Losing you would be difficult for her, but she expects it. She does not want it, but her emotional controls subsume it, so she loves me lots. But she hides it, because she expects it to hurt her by me leaving, so she makes it happen. Her worst fear, Josh considered, if we divorce, would she get worse? Probably a setback, but not much worse in the long run. She really expects it. Sometime, it's up to you, Josh. Do you want to stay married to her? Did she ruin it already? Can you overcome those images and fears in your mind? Rye looked directly at him. She knew how a man in love can obsess about his wife's affair and obsess forever. Have you treated many with this condition? Doctor, this combination of symptoms is probably a once-in-a-lifetime case for most of us, except in a clinic or mental hospital. Josh said perhaps you can write a paper on her treatment. It was spoken. Riley's cynicism is not becoming. The doctor laughed, and I'm considering it. I need everyone's consent, so you need worry. You'd have time to consider, and you could refuse. It was on the 4th trip to the Shady Grove that they found their man. It was the first week of July. The flooring was removed in a day at the alley and carted to the next place. Juvenile was paid without even showing up at the alley, or realtor Linda calling herself. Sue was sexy. She had too much eye. Makeup like women seem to wear to bars when they are still seeking men. They parked down the street near the sheriff's station, actually, and walked then separately to the bar. She went in a minute before he saw her at the bar, alone for a minute, but then men seemed to find her. This bartender was unknown to them, so he went to the guy and asked to see him in private. Josh told him he was a cop, and they went into the back for a minute. He explained what he wanted, how he would signal, and he agreed. Josh went back out, saw Linda, and looked back at the bartender, who nodded. Then Josh went to a booth. There was a crowd at 720, but not every booth or table was occupied. Linda had company, and a Virgin Mary Josh had told her not to drink if she could help it. The first guy to come up was not their man. He was blonde, very tall, and probably married or recently divorced. His ring finger had no ring, but a white band of skin around it. She talked to him a minute, and then probably insulted him. He looked at her as if shocked, and went away. She did this another 2 or 3 times when the suspect arrived, right height glasses, right side part in his brown hair. He was wearing a sport coat and an open collar shirt. Josh couldn't tell if he had on black gym shoes. He did not sit next to Linda, nor did he approach. He sat 2 stools away. He did order a drink, and he sipped at it for about 20 minutes. While watching the ball game on the big screen behind the bar and watching Linda whenever someone went by to hit on her, I was 20 feet away, and my pistol was accessible if needed. I could hear Linda when a guy came up to her, then, "Hi, I'm James Render." The new guy said he was average height, no glasses, light brown hair, wearing blue jeans and a striped pullover shirt. "Sue, nice to meet you." She shook hands with the guy. He seemed likable enough and no threat, so Sue engaged him in a conversation about the better sports, soccer, baseball, basketball, or football. She ordered another drink, also a virgin, and laughed sexily. Looking at her new friend, he started getting a little fresh, putting his hand on her bare arm, moving a little closer. But she looked at it and made some joke about not too forward, and he removed it only occasionally, touching her after our guy seemed genuinely interested in the game above. But I thought he was listening in. He ordered another drink. His first glass remained at his spot. The bartender looked at him. Josh touched his ear, and the bartender brought the man another drink. He took away his empty glass. He poured a tonic water for me, came over to my booth and handed me the tonic and the glass. He'd been careful to touch the glass only along the bottom rim. Good man. Linda looked at Josh. He touched his nose. They had what they needed. A minute later, she made apologies to her new friend and left the bar. It was 9:07. Josh watched the guy. Linda should have been safe by now. The guy was on the cell phone. A moment put money on the bar and followed Linda out, perhaps 2 minutes behind. Josh followed him, his glass in a bag. No one had considered that the guy might have an accomplice. When Josh got outside, he saw no sign of either of them. He was 2 minutes behind Linda and 20 seconds behind Juvenile. He ran to his car. He checked the GPS program in Linda's phone, and it was functioning. He followed, racing, went through a red light in the middle of town, headed toward the signal. Where were they going? Had Juvenile found Linda outside, thrown her in a car? No, there was no time for anything. But hopping in a car and heading out, they did not know Linda had an accomplice either. They ignored the GPS on the phone, at least until Josh had them in sight. They were on a divided highway. It looked like a Mustang to him, but it was dark. He saw it for a half mile before he caught it. The GPS stopped suddenly, so either they tossed it out the window and it broke, or they removed the battery. But he had them in sight, and he was doing something he knew how to do. He used his cell phone to notify the police, but just as he did, the car pulled into a parking lot by a McDonald's. It then carefully went over the back curb of the lot and onto a dirt track that went into scrub trees. He saw their lights then down the road, and they parked by a very small house. He abandoned his car in the lot and ran talking into his cell phone, trying to get Terry Jones and any other cop to this place. It was perhaps a 4-mile, and he made it finally, thinking he needed to start jogging more. The car was there dark. He heard them inside the building. They had lights on. They'd been in there maybe 12 minutes now. He went to a window and peeked. Linda was not in the kitchen. There was a woman. She looked about 60, Juvenile's mother. Perhaps she was wearing latex gloves. She left the kitchen while he watched, and Josh tried the door. It was unlocked. He slowly opened it, let himself in, and closed it. He heard heavy treading coming toward him, so he hid behind the refrigerator, and the woman was back. Her back was to him, so he hit her over the head with his pistol. He let her down to the floor. Gently, he hoped he had not killed her. He never pistol-whipped someone before she was breathing. He pulled out his cuffs and hooked her hand to a cabinet he hoped she'd not wake. He did not need her warning Juvenile down the hall. He found Juvenile with Linda. She was naked, spread eagle on the bed. Josh could not help the thought that she was magnificent, even in this evil circumstance. Her hands reached the corners of the headboard and were duct taped to it. She was awake, but she had a ball gag in her mouth. Her legs were tied with rope at the ankle, with her knees up attached to the headboard. Also, Juvenile was varying his technique. Yet again, Juvenile was talking to her as he prepared a long dowel for insertion. He put oil on it, but it was just a cheap wood dowel with a flat end. "I love you, Sue. I know you want me in. You look at that body of yours, magnificent, just magnificent. Are you ready yet?" He reached for her with the dowel in his hand. Josh shot him in the head. At that moment, he'd seen and heard enough. Sue had too. Sue's eyes were opened wide, startled. And the surprise lingered, and in her fear and anger and wonder, she realized Josh was not a lug. Not adult, not stupid, and not insignificant. Josh looked down at Juvenile, the mess he'd made of his head, and he felt relief. He turned to his wife. He removed the gag and ripped the tape from her wrists, and her arms went immediately around his neck. He hugged her, and he liked feeling the naked skin of her back, but he wanted to remove her before all the cops in this part of the world arrived. The sirens were close, she was crying, and suddenly the room was swarming with police. Josh grabbed a blanket and put it around them as they hugged. "Sheriff Jones was there. Well, I sure hope he's the one, because he's dead than a doornail. Now, Josh said we didn't realize he had an accomplice sick family." Josh gave a statement that was the whole truth. Did he identify himself? He did not have time. Did he ask the perpetrator to surrender? No time for that. Why did you fire? He was about to put a wowel up my wife a week later. The prosecutor looked at everything, including the 8 sexual offense and murders and positive DNA tests from the deceased, and put it before a group of citizens. The grand jury decided no bill. The prosecutor smiled. Sometimes justice was just. They indicted the mother on several counts of conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, aiding and abetting, and she eventually was sent away for 20, but her son was her life, and after his death, she was almost catatonic. Some people shouldn't be moms. They were home all the nights until the grand jury decision, and happy not to be anywhere others might show up. Josh was still considering divorce, but how do you divorce a woman with? God only understands personality disorder. Over the next week, sitting before the TV became their evening routine. They would sit together and discuss her most recent sessions with Dr. Carly, or his joining her for a session with the doc, or whether she thought her meds were effective, or a case at his work, or news, or politics. They cuddled again like in their days of dating. So it was for some time cuddling, remembering, but for Josh it would never go away. How whole was she? Sometimes when things go really bad, you should call time out. He had images in his mind that were troubling, upsetting sleep and causing irresolution. He was hesitant to initiate sex after her experience and all they had been through. So she did it one night some weeks after the incident. They sat on the couch and made out like teenagers. He eventually stood and lifted her shirt, pulling it off then, and she removed her bra. Linda was stunning naked. They kissed, and they finally made love after a mutual climax. They rested a minute. They were silent for a bit. They cuddled on the sofa. They felt like newlyweds. Josh thought she was different with the therapy. The drugs, she seemed realer, in tune with the world. She was rounded. She'd gotten upset at the sad ending of a movie, something he'd never seen. She'd shown him a novel. Let him read some 200 pages and more to come. She'd set a deadline for finishing it. Success seemed to matter to her. The doctor said she might write that paper on Linda and her treatment, which Linda was considering. We need to talk about the future sitting naked on the couch. She leaned into him, her hand seeking his, needing it, as they talked quietly. Do we have one, she asked, in the past? She'd have said such a thing in a monotone, protecting herself. This time, she said it with a hopeful inflection. Could he forgive? Forgetting was out of the question. He had called an attorney. Papers were waiting if he wanted to start the process. Josh just said, I got a call from a detective in Branson. He'd like us to look into a case down there. She looked at his eyes, feeling him relaxed with her. Sometimes marriage is not perfect. Sometimes it is a risk, no, he thought as he kissed her. It's always a risk and it's never perfect.